Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of the Warhoundcast. This week, I'm joined by Nathan.
Hello.
And Max.
Hi there.
And we're going to be talking about stuff. We're going to be talking about a little bit about the new ITC missions, a little bit about the new GW FAQ/Errata, specifically aimed at Space Marines. But we're mostly going to be focusing on Dark Angels and Grey Knights and how they've been affected by Psychic Awakening and the new Errata as well. So, but before that, Nathan, what have you been up to?
I have been making dice. That's pretty much it.
Do you want to expand on that? Because it's rather cool.
Yeah, so I started up a business that was basically focused on making like sustainable options available to people that in our hobby and other hobbies like D&D and stuff like that as well. I had plans on building some machines, which I ran into a few problems with, and then I sort of went off in a different direction, which was finding a non-plastic resin that would basically be able to make dice, which I've been doing over the last couple of months, and I'm basically at the point now where just the other day I made like 35 dice molds, so ready for like production and stuff. So I'm bringing that out very soon.
That's cool. And while we've got you, do you want to go over your Surrey Championship games quickly? Because
Do I have to?
you can go over them very, very quickly because we're still waiting on yours.
Yeah. So my first game was against Joe and his Grey Knights. He bought a Grey Knight list that he thought would work with the new Tides, but it actually didn't. Because he bought 3 Grandmasters and stuff, and they don't get affected by anything apart from Tide of Shadows. But yeah, so the first game, it was a really good game. Joe's dice rolls were absolutely insane, and we just kind of had a laugh about it and stuff. And it was a really good game. And yeah, I lost. I can't remember how much I lost by. I think it was fairly not close, but like on the points, it was all right. So it wasn't too bad. And then my second game was against Matt, who was playing the LVO Raptors list, the Raven Guard successor with Laius Isodon and 3 units of Centurions and all of that stuff. And the first couple of rounds were going really well for me. I think I went first, and by round 2, I think I'd basically screened out about 2/3 to 3/4 of the board, so that he could only drop down in like a very certain place. I basically just strung units of Dire Avengers out, moved my Wave Serpents up, etc. And then his Centurions came down, and he had 1 unit of Centurion Devastators, and he managed to bring them down like in a line along the table edge in his deployment zone. And all of them could just about, they were Grav Centurions, and they could all just about see the end tip of one of the Seer Council's singing spears. So he used the Grav stratagem on them and shot them into the Seer Council. And I think he got like 12 wounds through on them after, like, because I think they were concealed, and then I blew lightning fast as well, so they were -2 to hit and whatnot. And yeah, so we got 12 wounds through, and they were on a 3-up invuln, 5-up Feel No Pain, and I failed 10 3-up invuns. And then obviously he was re-rolling damage as well, and then I'm pretty sure I failed every single fortune save, and then he basically just wiped the entire Seer Council in one go.
Yeah, he did the same thing to my Black Knights a few weeks ago.
Yeah. So yeah, that wasn't good. And then I would have been okay had the turn after he had done that been all right for me. But I just completely and utterly whiffed. Like, I completely and utterly whiffed for the next 2 turns, and then it was just kind of game over, which was a bit sad because I think I played like really well against the list the first couple of turns with like the screening out the board and stuff like that. The dice just weren't there, basically. And then I had to drop out the tournament because one, I wasn't really feeling it because like my dog was ill as well, so I already kind of went into it not really in the right mindset. And then after that, I was just a bit like I was just going to go home and look after her. And then it ended up that I wouldn't have been able to attend on the Sunday anyway because I needed to look after her. So even if I'd played the round 3 on the Saturday, I still wouldn't have been able to come back to the tournament. So it is what it is. And yeah, that was my Surrey Championship.
Fair enough. So go to Max in a second, but before that, I just want to talk about my most recent game because I played Nathan on Monday, which is why we didn't talk about our game in that section. And I was running a variant of my Expert Crafters Eldar list without any vibro cannons because I want to try some new things out, and I was a bit sick of vibro cannons.
Yeah, me too.
You haven't played my vibro cannon list.
I have.
Have you?
Yeah.
Oh
I played them with my
sorry.
Raven Guard, and that's one of the very few games I lost with my Raven Guard list.
Yes, I withdraw my previous comment. I played. We played each other, and you were using your double paladin bomb list.
Yep.
And it started off all right for me. I felt first turn, neither of us killed anything. You did a bunch of wounds to stuff. I killed a couple of Grey Knights, paladins with basically on my army and charge from the Wraith Blades. I think I killed 5 or 6, and I was feeling reasonably good going into turn 2. Then everything started coming down, and more mortal wounds, and you smashed my Wraith Blades, and I was feeling still okay. Did some wounds back to the paladins. Rolled 9 mortal wounds from a executioner and smite, which was pretty nice. Which wasn't at all a bitter moment for anyone on the table at all. But yeah, then turn 3 rolled around, and everything of mine seemed to just not be able to get through the paladins at all because they were. I kind of tried to split my bets at this point because your turn 3, Nathan dropped a lot of his strike squads, which he had in reserve down. Previously, it basically had paladins and characters on table, so all I could shoot was paladins. And when they came down and just took massive control of the board, I didn't have a suitable response to deal with them and the paladins. To be honest, I don't think I could have dealt with the paladins at all. And we ended up calling it after round 3 because going into round 4, all of your paladins were in charge range, and I was just about to get annihilated completely. But yeah, takeaways: paladins are really, really tough to kill.
Yeah, they're they are and they aren't. Like actually with like transhuman and stuff like that, you're kind of. I guess we'll talk about it more when we go over the Grey Knight and Dark Angel stuff, but you're kind of banking on your opponent not being able to do anything against them maybe for 1 or 2 turns, and at that point you kind of just overwhelm.
Yeah, I think transhuman on these big Marine Death Star-esque units. So Centurions are another one, and the sort of Blood Angel Sanguinary Guard being another example that uses it quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's just such a powerful mechanic. It's really hard to get around. I also found out, or realized after the game, that I was inadvertently cheating with the shurikens because they're a 6+. So with the paladins having -1 to wound against them, that means they only get their rending effect on a 7.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so apologize for that, but I think you passed all of your invuns against the shuriken anyway.
Yeah, so I can't remember, but yeah.
Yeah. You smashed me. It didn't make a difference in the end. But worth noting for future reference. So Max, what was your most recent game?
Yeah, so my most recent game was against Stuart. He was running Pure Thousand Suns, so someone else looking to try and sweat Ritual of the Damned and see if they can make it work.
And I was running, so I've gone back to playing Dark Angels for the last month or so since it came out, having put them on a shelf over a year ago and not dared to look at them.
And have been, and we'll talk about it a bit later on when we go through Dark Angels stuff and how the list works. But yeah, it was a very one-sided game. He actually seized on me, which in hindsight was probably not the sensible thing to do, because it meant that part of his army was up in my face and I could deal with it a part of it at a time. And I think in his first turn, so I've got a big blob of 10 Black Knights, and they really are just the most amazing distraction carnifex, because you've got loads of other stuff in the army that's really killy, but all people want to do is shoot the plasma bikes, or charge the plasma bikes, which is great because the rest of the army is completely unmolested. So yeah, he spanked most of his CP as well, getting his Zangors up, re-rolling charges, making them fight twice, and he still didn't wipe the unit. And then in my turn, I killed what were left of the Zangors that the Black Knights hadn't killed in combat and Overwatch, which was pretty gross. Killed a 17-strong squad of Rubric Marines, killed a Demon Prince, killed an Exalted Sorcerer on disc, killed Ahriman on a disc, killed a Zangor Shaman, which was basically everything except for a Demon Prince,
a Vortex Beast and 10 cultists that he had on the table at that point in time.
He bought a load of Terminators down turn 2. They finished off a squad of scouts, and my last 2 Black Knights failed their other charges, and then I just turned around, shot all of those, and then at the end of the game it was just a case of my planes hunting his Vortex Beast down and murdering that. So yeah, it was very one-sided, and he had no models left by, I think it was turn 5, but that's only because he had a couple of, he had I think turn 5 he had one Exalted Sorcerer left on the board, and he didn't last very long. So yeah, it was very convincing, and that's the 4th game I've played with the Dark Angels since I've picked them back up again, and then 4th win in a row, which was pretty good.
Yeah, I'm having the opposite at the moment. I've been a little bit of trying out different Eldar stuff and trying to get into GNC Lookout, and I'm on a 4-game losing streak going into playing Rob on Monday, which probably means it's a 5-game losing streak. But yeah, as a nice aside, actually, the 3 of us today, and this was sort of half planned, but it worked out very well, that a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about is from Ritual of the Damned, and we have myself as someone who has played a lot of Thousand Suns in the past. We have a Dark Angels player and a Grey Knights player, which is just more than anything else a really happy coincidence. And I think if we start on there, I think I'll just have a quick word on the Thousand Suns, because I was a little disappointed by what they got here. It's undeniably better, and I think it makes them better in soup form, because Cult of Magic's really nasty with mortal wounds coming down and doing things, and everything else is kind of geared towards rubrics and Terminators, which is still a big miss in my book, and it basically makes the Thousand Suns very nasty in a Supreme Command detachment for Chaos, but otherwise I think they're in a pretty poor state.
Yeah, they the army doesn't seem to synergize that well, and yes, they've got some great psychic offenses, but I kind of, particularly with how my army plays, I just deployed everything in a way that, even though I was supposed to be going first and I was deploying first, I just deployed it somewhere that was like, well, nothing's going to be able to get to me with all of its psychic turn 1. and turn 2, hopefully I'll have kind of split his forces and done enough damage to sort of mitigate how much psychic I'm going to be getting at me. Now, I actually got probably luckier than I should have in terms of what I killed, and I don't think he was expecting his screen to evaporate in the way he did, but 4 up in buns, +1 saves against -1 doesn't do an awful lot against vortex bombs being dropped on you doing mortal wounds. So it was, and because a lot of the psychic powers are limited to that specific detachment, you can't be casting them on the wider army. You have to think quite carefully about who is in what detachment, and that obviously limits you in a number of ways.
Yeah, I think the other problem Thousand Suns have is, well, they do have some very good abilities in there still. They were one of the more powerful codexes when the FAQ changed all that time ago to when Smite got adjusted for everyone except for them in Grey Knights. But I think their big problem is that they are quite predictable in their game plan.
Yeah.
Pretty much all of their spells will always hit the closest unit. Their deep striking stuff is typically on Zangors. And those are the kind of their big tricks. The rubrics and the Terminators are in a reasonable spot. I don't think the rubrics are particularly good still. And I think that means that if you can screen out the Zangors and you've got a couple of sacrificial units to eat up Smite, that's kind of a lot of their tricks already there. Because they're pretty reasonable in combat, but they're certainly not as powerful as, say, Blood Angels. And their shooting is very limited, especially with anti-tank. It's all Smites. So I think that if you're a good player against Thousand Suns and you're familiar with the list, you can really take away a lot of their power.
Yeah, I kind of when I read through it, not having played Thousand Suns myself, but having gone up against Thousand Suns, it did scream to me that it just makes that textbook Supreme Command attachment just way better, and I didn't see anything in there that really sort of made Thousand Suns as a whole better.
Yeah.
Because I think it just comes down to that glaring hole of, like, Zangors are good, but they're not like Bloodletter Bomb good, and they're not like Paladin good.
Yeah, and they also suffered in chapter approved.
Yeah, they suffered in chapter
bad
approved
timing
as well. And then aside from that, like, the only anti-tank that you've got, unless you want to take like Predators, which you're probably not going to buy, is just Psychic, which can be whiffy, So
yeah, there's still a place for them in Soup. Araman and 2 Demon Princes and possibly a Cult Terminator Sorcerer is still a very competitive choice. But possibly with a unit of Terminators, Scarab Occult Terminators. But I think that's probably all we need to say on them.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think if we go from there to, I think, Dark Angels, just because I think they're Grey Knights have got a lot of publicity recently. Lawrence Baker, of course, did very well at Bournemouth Bash with them, and they've been putting up some reasonable results. Dark Angels are a bit more of a sleeper hit. So, Max, do you want to take it off with what you've been doing as a result of everything that's been changing recently?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of what Ritual of the Damned brought to the table for Dark Angels, is actually a couple of really killer relics and warlord traits, and most of them are for Ravenwing specifically. So one of the big problems, and I did run a primarily Ravenwing force sort of a year or so ago, and it had a loyal 32 in it and all that stuff. This is obviously well before Doctrines came to the table, and it was good, but I didn't have a lot of stuff. And obviously the big thing about it is that it's fast. It wants to be moving, but as soon as you're moving stuff, heavy weapons, suddenly the way you're hitting is so much less effective. So the first thing that kind of happened that put them in a good place was chapter approved. Point drops on Black Knights, point drops on Nephilim jet fighters, point drops on Dark Talons, even the very swingy land speeder Vengeance, which is the 9 wound toughness 6 land speeder that has a plasma storm battery on it that if you roll a 1 to hit on it, blows up, deals 3 mortal wounds, and you can't fire the gun for the rest of the game. But that also got quite a decent points drop as well, and suddenly you can take so much more stuff. You can certainly afford to make up that because you need CP. It can be quite CP hungry. You can afford to take those as a Space Marine battalion. But in terms of the real kickers, along with doctrines, which is obviously great. So their doctrine boost extends the range of heavy and rapid fire weapons by 6 inches in the Devastator doctrine, and assault and pistol weapons by 3 inches in the Devastator doctrine. So it actually affects all of their guns, which is really good, not just heavy weapons, which is what you get for things like Imperial Fists. So turn 1, you've got a bit more range to play with, and okay, so on things like Black Knights, that's only 3 inches, but suddenly your threat range has gone from 38 inches to 41, and I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but I've noticed it making a huge difference. And on things like Rift Cannons on the Dark Talons, going from 18 to 24 is massive in terms of their gun. So with their minimum move of 20, which you kind of want to be doing, so you're staying close to all their buffing units, is really good as well, because you're threatening more stuff turn 1, and you can deploy a bit more defensively, and because of that extra range, you're still going to be up there and in people's faces, even if you've set yourself back a little bit further to protect. But what's really enabling the list that I'm running to work as effectively as it is one of the Ravenwing Warlord traits, which is called Impeccable Mobility. And it's a 6-inch aura that means that Ravenwing units within that 6 inches don't suffer the penalty for moving and firing heavy weapons or for advancing and firing assault weapons. So you're no longer having to spend CP on things like Speed of the Raven, which you could do, but was only on 1 unit. So that suddenly has made the fire output from that very mobile castle so much more damaging, because you're just not dropping shots with Samael there to buff for rerolls to hit. So you're pretty much rerolling everything. You're hitting on 2s with a lot of stuff because of strafing run, or the fact that the Talon Master can take a relic that improves his hits by 1. So you've got a whole lot of real quality firepower just pouring out. And even though twin assault cannons, twin heavy bolters, they're only 1 damage, you're getting so many shots. It's just been really, really brutal.
I think that's the other thing to mention, is that the ignoring modifiers is more powerful with was more useful with Dark Angels than with Fists or other core Marine chapters, just because of their chapter master, who still has the old style of rerolls, as I only found out when talking to Max before this.
Yeah, so Azrael, much like Dante for Blood Angels, when they did these books, they haven't bothered to update their data sheets, so they still say reroll failed hits. And it's the same for Samael with Ravenwing. So his reroll all failed hits for Ravenwing units rather than just 1s, as you get with a normal captain. So yeah, it's really important, because again, you're picking up everything that you miss with.
So do you want to run us through your current list and what's been going well and what perhaps hasn't been going well with it?
Yeah, definitely. So over 4 games now, 3 of those were before the FAQ change. So I have primarily stayed in Devastator Doctrine for most of it. But actually, do you know what? I think for things like Dark Talons with the Hurricane Bolters, being in Tactical Doctrine isn't the worst thing in the world. So I tweaked it slightly after the third game. So I'll go through what the original list was, how it's tweaked, and what I envisage it ending up looking like once I have the models. So it's an air wing, it is a battalion, and it is an outrider detachment. So I have 10 CP to start with. I have 2 dark talons, so they're the flyers, with the rift cannons and twin hurricane bolters and stasis bombs, which they can do once a game, which are good fun. I've got a Nephilim jet fighter, and he's got the Avenger mega bolter, which is basically a 10-shot assault cannon with 36-inch range on it. And so that's the air wing. Then in the battalion, I've got an interrogator chaplain with power fist, and I'll explain why I've got him in a minute. I've got so this is the original list. I had a Primaris lieutenant with Stalker bolt rifle, and then a 5-man intercessor squad with Stalker bolt rifles, 2 5-man scout squads, all with bolters except for 2, a heavy bolter in each. And then 2 elites, 1 Raven Wing apothecary, and 1 Raven Wing ancient. And then in the outrider, I've got Samael. I've got a Talon Master, who is my warlord. And he has the warlord trait that I mentioned before, impeccable mobility, and he also has the relic, which is, the name escapes me, but in effect, what it does is it gives him +1 to hit, and it extends the range of his weapons by 6 inches. So on top of the Dark Angel's Doctrine boost, it's another 6 inches. So he has a 36-inch range twin assault cannon and a 48-inch twin heavy bolter.
Corvus Oculus is the relic.
Corvus Oculus, that's the one. Yeah, very good. So they're the HQs in the Outrider, and then I have a squad of 10 Black Knights, all with picks. I have a Dark Shroud, which is the -1 to hit dude, and then the aforementioned Land Speeder Vengeance with the Plasma Storm Battery and an assault cannon. So that is the list. And then I tweaked it slightly. So I dropped the lieutenant because he really wasn't doing anything, and I didn't need a 4th HQ. I had to downgrade, and I took instead just a land speeder with a heavy bolter and assault cannon on it, just because more DACA, why not? I had to change the interrogator chaplain's power fist to a plasma pistol, drop the melter bombs on the bikes to make it fit, but that's so fundamentally it's pretty much the same list, just with sort of one like for like swap. And then what I'll end up doing is swapping him and the 2 character bikers for another Talon Master. And then if I do that, I can give the interrogator chaplain his a jump pack, and give him his power fist back. So that's what I think the list will end up looking like.
So it's very quick because pretty much everything in it is moving 12 plus, isn't it? No, they're 14, isn't it, on the bikers, isn't it?
So yeah, the bikers move 14 and then auto advance 6, which you want to do every turn because they get a 4-up invuln when they advance, as do all Ravenwing stuff. The speeders all move 16, except for the Dark Shroud and the Vengeance, which move 12. But again, because they're got fly. They can move in a straighter line than other stuff, and are generally able to keep up to the back of a floating castle. And then the planes go anywhere from 20 to 40 on the Dark Talons and 20 to 50 on the Nephilim. So it is super quick.
So you on a lot of deployments, then you just can't hide from it, can you?
No,
unless there's a really weird building somewhere. It's a sort of 3-side wall building, but yeah.
And if you do hide from it, you're not going to kill very much turn 1. And the problem is it will. So the first game I played with it was against Rob's Gene Stealer Colts, funnily enough. And he had obviously half of his army in reserve, and then he used the strat to pick up 3 more blips. So he had well over half of his army in reserve, and he was actually going first. So he had 3 Leman Russ, tank commanders, and a bunch of other stuff. But his Leman Russes were either out of range with half of their guns, or would have to move over half to get in range of stuff. So mitigated some of the shooting. They were -1 to hit for moving with their sponsons, -2 to hit for the Dark Shroud, and then if they were targeting the planes, they were -3 or -2 if it was with the turrets. So in his first turn, he killed with 3 Leman Russ tank commanders. He killed 2 Black Knights and put 6 wounds on a Dark Talon, and that was it. And my turn, I moved up and I just obliterated all 3 tanks with shooting to spare, because there wasn't anything else left visible that I could shoot at, because all the troops were hiding or underground. So that was kind of how that went. And then he was bringing stuff in piecemeal, but again, and in every game I've played, the Black Knights have died turn 2. But do you know what? He's had to throw his whole army and a whole bunch of CP at it to do that. And again, assault cannons and heavy bolters are the ideal answer for lots and lots of bodies. Doesn't matter how many sort of feel no pains you've got, if you're facing that number of shots and high quality, high strength, and highly accurate shots, you just wear stuff down. So it's really, really good. And the reason the chaplain is in the force, and the reason why I'm keen to give him a jump pack, is because obviously he can give +1 to hit to a unit, so he can give that to the Black Knights, and then they're safely overcharging. And obviously with weapons of the Dark Age, I can give them, that's 3 damage plasma. That's 23 damage plasma shots, which is brutal in anyone's book.
Yeah, because I was when you were talking through your list, I'm like, that's got a lot of anti-infantry shots, but how do you deal with mass armor? But yeah, I forgot about the weapon of Dark Ages.
And the really
slag.
Yeah, and the really nice thing about that on the land speed of Vengeance, which I never thought was going to stay in the list, but I've now played 4 games with it, and I really like it. It did 6 wounds to a Demon Prince on Overwatch, because its overcharge set, its basic profile is strength 7, damage 2, and its overcharge is strength 8, damage 3. So if you weapons of the Dark Age that, it's damage 4 on overcharge, which is the perfect Centurion killer. Now it is swingy because it's D6 shots, but that's what you say if you reroll 4. So actually, I've found him super useful in a lot of matchups. If nothing else, he's very good at charge blocking.
Yeah, and the high roll potential is something to be very afraid of.
Well, yeah, exactly.
If you're playing against it.
If you think even the Devastator Doctrine, if I roll a 6, and I've got 6 strength 8 shots, hitting on 3s, re-rolling, if he was in, or if I could get the chaplain up with him and give him +1 to hit, then I'm hitting on 2s, and I'm not going to be doing those 3 mortal wounds myself. And if I'm playing against things like Centurions, well, 4 wounds a pop, thank you and good night.
It's very satisfying when you've got a 4 damage weapon versus Centurions.
He unfortunately didn't get to do it when I did play against. I played against the same Raptors list you did, actually. But again,
Rat's
he
list, yeah.
yeah he didn't do a huge amount in that game, but did charge block a bunch of assault centurions for the rest of my army, then to just run away and shoot from distance.
I think it was against a practice game for the doubles, Surrey doubles, where one of my Moirax obliterated an entire unit of Centurions just on its own with the Gravitons. Oh yeah, Verity is so good getting 4 damage against Centurions.
It is the perfect amount, because but then those aren't the only sources of high damage output I've got in the list. So the Dark Talons have got the Rift Cannon, which is a really weird weapon. It's shots D3, so again I've got a lot of really swingy shooting, but it's shots D3, range 18, which is mitigated by its speed, and in the first turn the doctrine boost. Strength 10, AP -3, flat 3 damage, and if a unit takes any damage from it, you roll on a rift table, and at full wounds on a 3 up, they'll take D3 mortal wounds. So I was finding that a couple of those into a squad of Centurions as well, suddenly, even though I was wasting some of the damage because it was taking 2 shots to kill one. With the mortal wounds on top of that, between the two of them, they more or less killed a unit of 4 between them, just with the mortal wounds on top, because I was killing one with the first one, and then putting a bunch of mortal wounds on, or even at just 1 mortal wound on the next one, and then suddenly the next one is killing 2, and then a load of mortal wounds are spilling over. So they've been really good as well.
I love, like, thinking about it now, that after you mentioned that, I love weapons that do that, because I've used, well, Executioner, the psychic power is a good example of that, where you do D3 mortal wounds, and then if you kill something, you do another D3 mortal wounds. It's kind of like the same thing. And then when I was using Drakari, I would always give my rack Saucer which do the same things with, it's I can't remember how many shots it was, but it's it always wounds on 2s on infantry, it's -3 and it's 1 damage, but if you kill a model, then they take another mortal wound on a 4 up. And then you've got the same thing with the Death Jester's guns as well, where if you kill any models, they take that many mortal wounds again.
Yeah, it's
just
really,
so
really good.
Yeah, it's
It's
so
one of
good.
the-
It's so unexpected. Like it can do some really unexpected amounts of damage.
Well, that was the thing. I was firing it into Rubric Marines, and okay, I was killing 2 with the shots. Rift Vortex goes off. I've just killed 5, and
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
it's like from a D3 shot weapon on single wound models. Even in those instances where you've got something that's quite tough to chew through, because it's because it's got an invar, if it's only 1 damage, it's got a 2 up save. So yeah, the Dark Talons have been super good in pretty much every game that I've used them.
Yeah, they are really good flyers.
So just quickly, you're using the Black Knights. They've been used a lot as your sort of distraction kind of effects. How many points are they now after chapter approved?
So 10 is, I think, and I'll double check in a sec, but I think it's about 330.
That's good. So that's the same. So that's 33 a modeler. So it's the same ballpark as a Shining Spear, or things of that ilk, with higher toughness, potentially an in-run save. And is it just the plasma gun shot? Just the plasma gun shot.
So they
don't
have
bolters.
no, they don't. So the plasma is in places where the bolters are. So they have 2 shots from that. And the advantage is they're fearless. So I can lose half the unit, and I'm never going to have to waste CP on auto passing morale. And as long as I've got a couple alive, they're still a pain. And they, even in the game against Euan, sorry, not Euan.
I
The game against
haven't played this list.
no, the game against Stuart and his Thousand Sons. There were only 2 left, but he dropped in 10, so 2 units of 5 Scarab Occult Terminators, and they were the only thing screening my backline. But because they'd advanced, they had a 4-up invuln. Because they're Space Marines, I could transhuman them if I needed to, which isn't really against lots of bolters, but things like the missile racks and the Soul Reaper cannons. Well, again, they're toughness 5, so I didn't even need it against the Soul Reaper cannons. They tanked all of the shots from those 2 units, and that's just 2 of them. So they are really good. And they do allow the rest of the army to survive a lot longer and keep pumping out the damage. And if they do get to kill something, great. I think playing Blood Angels, they hosed down a squad of Hellblasters. They killed some scouts. They do some other bits and pieces, and that's the only game actually I've had a few still on the board. But the thing is, they're the thing that everyone will go after. And when they're not shooting them and my planes are still in the air, I will take out the stuff that you can deal with my planes more effectively with. And then suddenly, the army's difficult to hit as it is with the Dark Shroud. But, the Dark Shroud, the planes next to the Dark Shroud are -2, which is great.
Yeah, a lot of Eldar players will have fond memories of -2 to hit planes. But,
Yeah. And what's been great with Ritual of the Damned is now I've got some stratagems that make them a lot more survivable. So if I don't have first turn, obviously on the bikes I can play transhuman if I need to against anything stronger than strength 5. But I can also jinky unit for 1 CP, so I can put that 4-up invuln on them in my opponent's first turn, even though I haven't advanced them yet. And I could do the same with one of the planes or anything else that I haven't quite managed to keep out of threat range for turn 1. So you've got more defensive abilities to keep your army on the board if you're not going first and you are facing something with quite a bit of DACA.
So speaking of defensive abilities, that seems like a good point to switch up to the Grey Knights. And 1 unit in particular seems like a good place to start.
Yeah, I think what I'll do, I'll go over just some of the bits because it is quite complicated. The new Grey Knight stuff. So right out the bat with Ritual of the Damned, with Ritual of the Damned and the combination of that and Chapter Approved, because Grey Knight's got huge points drop across the board in Chapter Approved,
which they really, really needed. Let's be fair.
Yeah, they did. So now I think a Strike Marine costs the same as an Intercessor rather than being more expensive. So that's good. But yeah, so Ritual of the Damned bought a lot of stuff to the Grey Knights. So the main thing is that we basically get doctrines which are called tides. So you don't follow through each doctrine or tide as you normally do, i.e. you start on Devastator, move to Tactical, and then Assault. You pick one, there's 4, so you pick one at the start of the battle, and then you have a psychic power to switch them, so you can't switch them any other way. One of the tides basically gives you +1 strength and +1 damage on psi weapons, which is incredibly good because Grey Knights lack anti-tank. And there was also a clarification in the book that if you use psi bolt ammunition on bolters, then they become psi weapons. So basically, if you're in that tide and you use psi bolt on a unit with storm bolters, they become psi weapons, get the extra strength and damage, which is insane. There's another tide, which Tide of Shadows, which gives you you're always in cover, and if you're touching a terrain piece, then the whole unit's -1 to hit, which is really good because it makes them more tanky. Generally, you kind of use this if you're going second in the first turn. So start on Tide of Shadows and then switch. And then one of the other tides is your smites always do flat 2 damage, which is just incredible. It's exactly what Grey Knights needed, having 1 damage smites. So it's really good. And then the other one, I've actually completely forgot what it is, but I think it's
reroll wounds with 1 with
for
Nemesis weapons. Yeah.
Yeah, which
It's the one you never use.
yeah, I've never used it so far. But it's nice to have because we don't get access to lieutenants, so it's nice to have a rerolls to wound. So yeah, those are the tides. Grey Knight's also got a new psychic discipline, which is incredible. So you can only take this on characters, so you can't take this on anything other than characters. I'm just going to go through some of the ones that are a part of my list. I'm not going to mention the other ones. I think there's 8. There's 6 or 8, I think.
6. And I think it's worth pointing out that even the ones that you don't have selected are good. Just flat out, all of them are good.
Yeah, they're all incredibly good. So let me just grab this. So there's one called Armored Resilience. It's Warp Charge 6, so it goes off on a 5 because you get +1 anyway. 12-inch range. Basically, you select a unit within 12 inches, infantry unit within 12 inches, and they're -1 to wound, which is great. It's amazing. You've got another one, which is the Dict Imperator, which is Warp Charge 7, so it goes off on a 6. You select a Grey Knights unit within 12. They can shoot in the psychic phase as if it was your shooting phase and then move again, which is really good. It gives you a little bit more movement, allows you to shoot out of phase, which is nice because there's a few combos that you can do with this, which I'll get onto when I go through my list. You've got Ethereal Manipulation, again, Warp Charge 7. You pick a Grey Knight unit within 6 until the start of your next psychic phase when resolving an attack made by a model in the shooting phase. With a unit that's within half range, you can reroll the hit roll. So Drago, as I mentioned earlier, hasn't had his datasheet redone, so he's still reroll failed. But you can get reroll all hit rolls now with a psychic power if you're within half range. So that's 3 of them, and then I've actually taken 5 of them, so there's only 1 missing. It's in a fire that's missing, which I think is it you?
It's risky super smite kind of.
Yeah, you roll the dice to cast, and then you do something with that. Is that right?
Yeah. So you sorry, I had that a second ago. You roll a d6. Well, you roll a number. The Grey Knights player rolls a number of d6 equal to the result of the psychic test. For each roll of a 1, the psychic takes a mortal wound. For each roll of a 3+, the enemy suffers a mortal wound.
Yeah.
So kind of a risk reward thing, especially considering you can manipulate and buff the Grey Knights casting in various ways.
Yeah. So, so the last 2 that I've got in my list, Imperium Domination, Warp Charge 7. If manifested, you gain a command point, which is great. So Grey Knights can, excuse me, do some CP farming, which is much needed. And then finally, did you want to say something?
Nope.
Okay. Finally, Warp Shaping, Warp Charge 5. This is the psychic power you use to change the tide or the doctrine, basically. So that's the new psychic discipline. Then we also get access to a new set of litanies for the Grey Knights. Now, our chaplains don't get access to the normal Space Marine ones, which is pretty annoying because even with all the new stratagems and stuff that you get with Grey Knights now, there's still no way to manipulate charges apart from First of the Fray, which is the Warlord trait. So I was really hoping to get the +2 to charge on a chaplain, but yeah, we don't get access to that.
You just get to smite everyone to death.
Yeah. I've actually, so I'm looking at Battlescribe. I've actually dropped the chaplain from my list, and I haven't got the book near me. But basically, I think there's 3 or 4 that are really good. So there's a litany. I think all of them, apart from a couple of them, which are buffs to the chaplain and himself. One of them, you select a unit and you re-roll damage rolls for random damage weapons, which is really good on a unit if they've got like silencers, or it even works on the nemesis weapons if you're in combat. There's another one which a lot of people take, which is psi weapons get an additional AP, which is really strong, but I found, because Grey Knights are still an elite army, they're still quite expensive, and I found that the points for the chaplain were better served somewhere else, because that's really all he does, and it's only on a 3-up, and you really don't want to be wasting CP to re-roll it. So
just a question, sorry.
Yep.
Most things in Grey Knight armies can cast psychic powers. Is a chaplain an exception to that?
no, chaplains get 1 cast as well.
Okay. So mini librarians and in the typical Grey Knight way as well. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. So you can give him a power, but other than that, it's not really doing anything if he fails. So it's a bit of, I see it as just wasted points. The -1 AP on nemesis weapons and psi weapons is really nice, but even with the couple of, so I've had 4 games now, and even with the few of the games that I've had, apart from ours, Euan, where I actually used a little bit of a change list, I found that I would much rather have other supporting characters than the additional AP on 1 unit. So
yeah, I think you're right as well, that it's a nice to have ability rather than a must take, in the same way that a +1 to wound or a bonus to charge is.
Yeah, and like in the double paladin list, there's literally no fat to cut off the list. So like you can't, I felt like really bad having him there, and like if I would fail the litany, it was just like, okay, so I've got like 105 or 10 points of just dead like weight that's not doing anything at all. So yeah, I'll get into what I've changed up, because
Yeah, do you want to go through your list?
yeah, so basically so this is a variant of the list that Lawrence ran. So I took the concept that he did, and then I kind of built around it with what I thought I would put in there. So his list was basically double battalion, 2 10-man paladin bombs. One of them's all storm bolters, the other one is storm bolters and 4 psi cannons. The 2 battalions are obviously fitted out with 6 minimum units of strike marines with falchions, and then he had, I believe it was a brother captain, Voldus, a librarian, and a chaplain. So he had all of that. Now my list is pretty much the same, so it's still a dual battalion. The list that I'm going to be going into, so the first battalion, I've got brother captain, which is there to just double the smite range. He will be on my warlord with first of the fray, so re-rolling charges. He's just got Gate of Infinity, just because I needed a character with Gate. He's got a Nemesis Hammer and a Psi Cannon. Then I've got Drago, which is where where a little bit of the shuffling my list has compared to everyone else's, because I've looked at a couple of the big tournaments that have been going on since this is released, and since Lawrence took his to the Bournemouth GT, and everyone seems to be running kind of like the same list, and no one seems to be running Drago. So I've kind of cut a lot of stuff out of my list in certain places just to fit him in, because I was finding that having re-roll everything on 1 unit was really good when you're gating them up, but then you've basically got nothing for the rest of your castle. So having Drago there, and he's just really good in combat anyway. So I do have Drago in my list, which in our game was really useful because it meant that I could re-roll failed hits for my other paladin unit. He's just got Astrolabe and Sanctuary. Then I've got 3 units of Strike Marines. Now, I've actually gotten rid of the falchions in my Strike Marines now. I wanted to do this anyway because I felt that although 3 attacks is really good on falchions, they're still only strength 4, and so the wounding is quite unreliable. Whereas now, because of shock assault and essentially being 2 attacks base on the charge, I felt that halberds were the better option because they're strength 5. So
They're also more expensive, aren't they? They're for taking 2 falchions.
yeah, exactly. So I've actually, over this list, I've actually saved 30 points by just taking halberds instead, which is, it doesn't sound like a lot of points, but it is in a list like this. So in the 1st battalion, all of the Strike Marines have Gate of Infinity. That's just as a backup. So then I've got 2 units of Paladins. In this, they're both exactly the same. So I was running the 2 different units, but now I'd just come to the conclusion that I'd rather them both be the same and have the same loadouts. So I was originally running a 10-man unit of Paladins with just Stormbolters like Lawrence was, which is really good if you've got the Chaplain, because you can make them with Cybolt and the +1 strength, +1 damage from the Tide. You can make them strength 6 -2 flat 2 damage, which is really good. And then there's a stratagem where if you've already shot a vehicle or monster, you can get reroll all wounds. So they can do a lot of damage with their Stormbolters. But I knew because I'd been using Paladins and Grey Knights for a little while before this. I'd already done a little bit of math hammering what the best loadout for the Paladin unit was, and you get. So I was originally running them with silencers, which means that rather than 40 Stormbolter shots, you get 6 Paladins with Stormbolters, which is 24 shots, and then you get 4 Paladins with silencers, which is another 24 shots. So you get more shots by doing it that way, and also the silencers are just better anyway. But now that you get the Tide, which increases the strength and damage, it's actually better to run them with Psy Cannons. So 4 Psy Cannons in the unit, because they're all, in the Tide, they're going to be strength 8 -1 flat 2 damage, and it's the -1 that is the real kicker, because without the Chaplain, the silencers or the Stormbolters can only get AP if you use Cybolt or Psychic Onslaught on them. So I'm finding that this list runs out of CP almost within the first turn, or at least within the second turn. So
Yeah, I think in our game you were out of CP by my assault phase.
Yeah.
Go
You
big
got
or
some-
go home, right?
Yeah, you got some back, but yeah, definitely went quick.
Yeah, so actually having the Psy Cannons to have sustained fire output with at least 1 AP to sort of like push people out of cover, or make people take their invuns rather than just the normal saves, I think is much more beneficial than just having a unit with Stormbolters. And also it gives you strength 8 as well, which is, apart from if you took like Grandmaster, and actually they don't even get affected by this.
They can't benefit from it, can they?
So really the only thing that you're looking at is like flyers with las cannons, land raiders, or dreadnoughts with las cannons. That's the only other place that you could get that kind of firepower from, with the other stuff that you can do with it. So the close combat weapons is 8 halberds and 2 warding staves. So the 2 warding staves are in there just to give them a 3-up in combat, which is really good. So those are the 2 paladin squads. Then in the 2nd battalion, the troops choices are the same again. So 3 strike marine squads with halberds, all 5-man. These guys all have vortex because there's a new stratagem where a unit coming in from the a unit with teleport strike, with the teleport strike ability, when they deploy onto the battlefield, they can come within 3 inches of an enemy, as opposed to they have to be 9 inches away. So what you can do with that is, so that all 3 of these units have vortex. So what you can do with that is you can come down 3 inches away. If someone's deployed their like castle a bit skew with or whatever, you can kind of come down inside their castle and then vortex something which will do D3 mortal wounds to that model and every other unit within 3 inches. So it won't hit themselves, but it will usually hit everything around them.
Yeah, I found in our game, I found that so hard to screen against both sides of that. In that you don't want to leave, especially something like a warlock or a farseer, out where it could be shot. So you want to surround it with things, and if you surround it with things, you become vulnerable to vortex. So it's a horrible balance to try and get. Thankfully, in our game, I managed to boss my deny, but
yeah, I think your warlocks and your farseer were like hugging the side of a falcon or something.
Yeah,
So
there were 2 tanks and a wraithseer, and they had to be surrounding them so you couldn't drop down and shoot them. But it meant you had the chance to do that, and it was pick one or the other.
Yeah, vortex is even worse when you cast it on a vehicle because obviously it spreads the 3 inches out over a much bigger distance.
Just on the deny, one thing I forgot to mention about my game against Thousand Suns is with the Dark Angels is I used the Hero of the Chapter strat to give my Interrogator Chaplain Warlord trait, and the reason it's important he's an Interrogator Chaplain is because Interrogator Chaplains are Deathwing, which gives them access to the Warlord trait Watched, which enables them once per game to deny a psychic power. Doesn't matter what it was cast on, where he is on the board, how far away he is, the power just doesn't go off, which in some matchups is pretty clutch. He wanted, and what I used to deny it on in that is he wanted to sling a Mutalith Vortex Beast up into my lines turn 1, and I already had the Zangors to deal with, so I just said no, he's not coming, not invited.
Yeah,
Really good.
what we're talking about denied, actually, I think one of the things that's very hard against Grey Knights is just keeping track of the amount of psychic powers. Thankfully, Nathan's top chap and is willing to go through what he has and hasn't cast left. But when you've only got 1 or 2 denies, which is a reasonable amount, as Eldar do, against this sort of wave of psychic powers, because you're casting, 10, 15 a turn, somewhere in that region quite consistently?
Yeah, even more than that, actually, because most of the characters have at least 2 casts, so it's more in the realm of sort of near on 20, I would imagine.
Yeah, and keeping track of what are the key ones you want to have a go at stopping is really hard against Grey Knights now. Because you're kind of like, cool, you just have this might, you get those, and I've got to work out if I want to try and stop the -1 to wound, or if I want to stop the fire and fade escapability, or if I want to stop him switching tides. It's mentally very tough to keep track of that. Just that amount of psychic powers that keep going off.
You've also got to weigh up like what is happening in the turn as well, because if it's turn 2 and I've created a gap to come down, you might want to let me like get my important like defensive powers off, like armored resilience, because you're going to be taking like 12 smites basically that are all going to be flat 2 damage.
Yeah, it's a real balancing thing, and in some ways I'm a little envious of the ones that the people are like, aha, I have no denied, off you go. Trying to keep track of it was just a nightmare. Especially when you're like, okay, these 2 can deny these guys, these can deny the paladins, these can deny the characters, he can deny everything. Yeah, it was a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, with 1 deny for the game, you know it's going to go off, but you've only got 1 for the whole game. You've really got to pick your moment.
Yeah. It's
And
so clutch though, because you could be like if you were going against orcs, you could be like, oh, I'm going to cast a jump, and you're just like, nah.
Nah. What do you mean I'm not in denial range? Who cares?
Or like if like an Eldar player moves their shining spears into the middle of the board and they're like, right, I'm going to cast Quicken now. You're just like, nah.
Nope.
It's really good. It's so good.
And I think in ITC, with it not being him not being my warlord, being able to spend a CP on doing that against a Psycho-Heavy army is just so useful to have in your back pocket. Because what
Yeah.
I'd do if I wasn't facing any Psychos is I'd probably still use Hero of the Chapter, but I'd stick it on the other Talon Master that I'm going to put in. And the reason for that is keep on bringing us back to Dark Angels, but it's so good. And is one of the other Ravenwing Warlord traits. Is what's it called? I can't remember what it's called, but basically what it does is it's tactical flexibility, and 1 turn per game. Again, 6-inch aura within that 6 inches of that model, which will be my flying castle. You can choose which doctrine is active. So whereas I was having good success because I was in Devastated Doctrine the whole time before the FAQ, now I could still be in Devastated Doctrine with all of the stuff that needs to be in Devastated Doctrine until turn 2, which is huge. So if I'm not facing any psychers, I'll grab that. Otherwise, definitely want that 1 deny for a clutch stopping someone moving half their army across the board.
Yeah. It's that other thing that combos really well with your list, in that, like, something that I found that you have to be very particular about when you're going up against someone like Eldar with their, like, basically army-wide buffing psychic powers like Doom and Jinx and stuff like that. Like, it's a real problem for Death Star lists, because if you can sort of just say, well, my entire army gets to reroll wounds against that, it's so powerful. So when you can just go, when you've got this unit like your Black Knights, which are, like you've said, you're playing them in a way where they can deal loads of damage, but also they're a real distraction con effects, and they can tank lots as well.
Yeah.
You can increase their defensiveness against armies like that, where if an Eldar player goes, I'm going to doom them, you just go, no, you're not. And then you've got another turn of potential.
Well, that's the thing, because transhuman physiology is great, but as soon as everyone's re-rolling everything on it, you start to get a lot of 4-ups coming through. So being able to turn that kind of thing off, you're absolutely right, would suddenly make them a lot more robust, and do their job for a bit longer.
It's super good, because I mean, even the is it Gryer Admech? They get the stratagem
for 4-up deny, the same as World Eaters,
World Eaters,
and Sisters of Battle, and Iron Hands for some reason. Well, theirs is at least 2 CP.
Yeah. So even those are super good. So just being able to just do it without any roll or anything is just really good.
Yeah.
So, going back to the Grey Knights. So I think I was talking about the 2nd Battalion and the Strike Marines in that with Vortex. So yeah, you can bring them down outside of 3 inches, then Vortex something and potentially hit everything within 3 inches of that. The other thing as well is that obviously they're still a 5-man unit of Strike Marines with Stormbolters, so they've got 20 shots. So if you're in the tied with +1 strength, +1 damage on psi weapons, you can psi bolt them, and then all of a sudden you've got 20 strength 6 -1 flat 2 damage shots 3 inches away from potentially all your characters and Warlord and everything. So
it's like a grey light Kellamorph.
Yeah, it's really good. I actually I haven't used it yet in a game, but I'm
The
sure
potential of it
clutch.
is just really scary.
Yeah, so in every single game I've explained that that's why I've got that. So like in your game, in our game, you were already aware of that, and like you kind of prevented me from doing that, and I'd already spent all my CP anyway, which is, I think, is actually what happened in all the other games, is that I just spent all my CP.
But it did affect my deployment, and it did, as we said earlier, it meant by playing around that, I made myself more vulnerable to Vortex.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So the last two characters in the two characters in that battalion, I've got Voldus, which is what everyone else is running. Because he knows 3 powers and can cast 3, he's a really good target for the new Dominus psychic book thing. Can't remember what it's called.
Discipline.
Discipline. That's the one. Because you can't chop and change what you're giving them, so you can't give Voldus like armored resilience and sanctuary. You have to either pick Dominus or I can't remember what the old one is, like Sanctus or something like that.
Sanctic, isn't it?
Yeah. So he's basically got most of the less important powers. So he's got armored resilience, which is the -1 to wound. He's got Addict Imperator, which is the move and shoot, because unless it's like turn like 4 or 5 or 6 and all the paladins have died, he's probably not going to be going anywhere. So he's obviously really good in combat because he's got a Thunder Hammer that has no minus to hit. So he can deal a lot of damage himself, but he's more of sort of like a support character for the most of the game. He's got Addict Imperator, which is the move, which is the shoot and then move in the psychic phase, and then he's got Ethereal Manipulation, which is the reroll all hits if you're within half range. So that's Voldus, and then I've got a Librarian. So Grey Knights didn't get any new Warlord traits, but they got loads of new relics. 2 of them specifically are really good. There's a couple of weapons in there, and then there's a couple that are really situational. So I've got a Librarian who I've given a Nemesis Warding Stave just to improve his save in combat if anyone gets into combat with him. And he's got my free relic, which is the Sanctic Shard. So the Sanctic Shard allows you to re-roll all failed psychic tests and also gives you +1 to cast, which is just crazy for a relic.
Especially as you already have +1 just for being
Yeah.
a Grey Knight.
Yeah. So this is where the psychic in the list gets a bit crazy. So he is my caster for Imperium Domination, which is the refund of CP, and Warp Shaping. So he gets +2 to cast and he rerolls all failed psychic tests. So those are the 2 real important ones, because getting more CP back as Grey Knights is super important, because the stratagems and stuff that you can use are just really good now, and especially being able to change the tide is like the most important thing. So having him just stacked with rerolls and +1 to cast and whatnot is really good. So that's the list. Just going into sort of how it's played, it's a really they're now a really cerebral army. Like it requires a lot of thought into what you're doing, because there's quite a lot of combos that you can do with the switching of the tides and stuff like that. So my usual game plan, which is what Lawrence has also talked about on Tabletop Tactics, basically unless you're going up against someone like Genestealer Cult where you might need to screen or something like that, you put all of these Strike Marines in the Teleportarium, you deploy the 2 units of Paladins on the board, you deploy all the characters on the board. You should be able to hide most of those if you're going second. You might need to deploy some Strike Marines just to make sure that people can't get like around terrain or whatnot. But generally, you put all of those in the Teleportarium. And then your first turn, whether you're going first or second, it's kind of the strategy seems to be kind of the same, in that you keep 1 paladin unit wrapped around your characters to protect them, and they will move up. So they will move up 5 inches from wherever you're deployed. In the psychic phase, what you do is you start, depending on whether you're going first or second, you're probably going to be in the Tide of Shadows, or you might even be in the smiting one. I can't remember what it's called.
Smite of Mind Bullets.
That's the one. So if you're going second, you're probably going to be in Tide of Shadows just to get the defensive buffs. So they always in cover and -1 to hit if you're touching terrain. And the psychic one purely because with the brother captain, your smites are 24 inches, so there's quite a range on them. So if you've got the second turn and someone's coming towards you, or you're moving towards them, like you're moving 5 inches, which gives you basically a 29-inch threat range on your smites for the guys in the castle from where you're deploying. So you might actually be able to get some smites off turn 1. But essentially what you then follow into the psychic phase, and this is what I usually do. So I'll go to my librarian first, who's got the +2 to cast. I'll cast Imperium Domination to get a CP. So it's Warp Charge 7, which becomes a 5 because of its +2. And obviously you can re-roll it, so the chances of it going off are quite high. You then immediately spend that CP on a new stratagem, which when a Grey Knight Psyker successfully casts a psychic power, you spend 1 CP and everyone within 6 inches of that Psyker gets +1 to cast. So now suddenly your entire castle is all +1 to cast. Then what you do is you, depending on what you're doing, you might leave warp shaping till last. This is where it gets kind of complicated in how you play Grey Knights now, because you have to sequence stuff with switching the tide in mind. So if you are within range, you might want to stay in the smite tide and then switch it at the end to the shooting tide, or you do it the other way around. So you might just go straight into, if you're going second and you want to go straight into shooting, you'll probably go Imperium Domination Warp Shaping to switch the tide. In which case, your librarian is now +3 to cast. So warp shaping is a warp charge of 5, so it actually can't fail even on a double 1. You obviously need to re-roll it anyway, just in case you perils and the other person needs to deny it. But you actually cannot fail that. So with the Sanctic Shard and that stratagem, you can't fail switching the tide, which is really good. So then if this was my first turn, I'd switch into the shooting tide, basically. Go through everyone's powers. Generally, you want to be casting most of the defensive powers on a unit that you're going to gate up, a unit of paladins. So you give them -1 to hit. You make them reroll all hits at half range. You give them sanctuary, and I think that's about it with casting on them. They have hammer hands, so they would cast that on themselves. This is the first unit. And then what you would do is you would cast Astral Aim on the other unit of paladins, the ones that are actually going to stay there, and then you would cast Edict Imperator on them to shoot in the psychic phase. Use Psybolt Ammunition or Psychic Onslaught, depending on what your target is, to buff the Psy Cannons or the Storm Bolters. And then what you're basically doing is you're shooting in the psychic phase to clear the screen before you gate the other unit of paladins. So you basically shoot that unit of paladins that's shooting in the psychic phase into the screen, then you gate the other paladin unit in that sort of hole that you've just carved out with that paladin unit. Then you move into the shooting phase, use Psybolt Ammunition or whatever again, then you can sort of hit, or in theory hit, the people's the opponent's targets that you want to get to, their alpha targets, and then potentially get a charge off, but it's not always needed. And that's basically the first turn. Obviously, if you get a charge off, then because the paladins do so much damage, you might want to consider spending 3 CP and fighting again. So declaring a charge against multiple things, then consolidating into them, fighting again. But generally, it's okay if the paladins don't make the charge, because the whole idea of the first unit is to tank everything for the other paladin unit and everything to basically just take control of the board. So in the enemy's first turn, they're probably going to be targeting that paladin unit, because if they don't, then that's going to be a massive problem for them, because they're
Yep.
already there, basically. So in their turn, the likelihood is they're going to put everything into that unit. So then you can spend 2 CP on transhuman to make them only wound on a 4-up. And then there's a couple of other stratagems. So one of them is paladin specifically, and the other one is just that is just for Grey Knight Terminators, which obviously paladins are. So you could make them -1 damage. So you want to do that depending on what's actually being shot into you. And then the other one is only relevant in the assault phase, where paladins can fight when they die. So it's a really good way of getting the value out of the unit if they get charged. But generally, you're looking at a paladin unit that's on a 4-up, 4-up in Vun, a 3-up in combat, that are anything that is strength 5 or higher is wounding them on a 4 because of transhuman. Anything strength 4 or lower is -1 to wound because of the psychic power. So bolters are wounding on 5s, lasguns are wounding on 6s. And yeah, depending on what's being shot at, like if you're being shot at by a knight with an Avenging Gatling cannon, you do the -1 damage, so it's only 1 damage coming through. It's very tanky.
Yeah, so I think in our game, I killed what, 5,
You killed
9 of 10 of them,
yes,
and about half of that was with psychic damage.
Yeah, you killed 6 of them. 6 of them in the first turn. I think you
Mhm.
killed 3 in shooting and like 3 in combat,
Yeah,
something like that. Or it might have been like
yeah, I think
5.
yeah,
and
the
then
Wraith
1 or
Blades
something.
charged, and I think they did a bit. I remember that they rolled pretty well.
Yeah. But then you're now at the point where so this is the real kicker for me with paladins, is that they're, even if you lose like 7 like bodies in the unit, they still do so much damage in combat.
Especially with things like Hammer Hand on them, where they get that +1 to wound.
Yeah.
3 is enough.
Yep. So yeah, so generally after your opponent's first turn or after your first turn, and you've done that, they're probably going to either have killed the paladin unit, or you're going to be left with like a few left, if you pass the morale or if you just choose to auto pass it. What I did in mine and Euan's game is I gated them back so that Euan couldn't get an easy kill one off of that, because we were playing ITC.
Easy is a very relative term, but yes.
So basically, you're going into turn 2 in the shooting tide now, basically, because you don't choose the tide at the battle round. You choose it at the start of the battle, and you can only switch in the psychic phase. So you're already in the shooting tide going into turn 2. You're potentially bringing down all of your strike marines turn 2, so you want to be in the psychic tide. So you need to think about what you're doing with the other paladin unit now before you switch the tide, because you need to get more value out of their guns, basically. So generally what you do is you bring the strike marines down turn 2 or turn 3. You might choose to wait until turn 3, but it's essentially the same deal. So you bring those down. You then run through the whole psychic phase again, exactly the same. So you use the librarian to cast Imperium Domination to get like at this point you might be out of CP, but you gain a CP and then you immediately use that CP to get +1 to cast on everyone, because the powers are so important to go off. Then this is when you don't cast Warp Shaping straight away.
Yeah,
So
you
what
wait till the end, you do your smites, and you can switch out.
Yeah, so what you do is you cast all the buffs on the remaining paladin unit in the middle of the board. At this point, you would hope on a good board you would have like some big bits of line of sight blocking terrain in the middle. You're probably going to want to still cast Astral Aim on them to shoot through walls and ignore cover. But if not, you're basically going to be casting everything else. So Sanctuary, -1 to wound, You might choose to not do a few powers like reroll all hits at half range because you've got Drago there anyway. In which case that frees you up for another smite. But basically you do all of that, and then what you do is Voldus casts Edict Imperator on them. They shoot in the psychic phase and then move. What you can also do is you can move them in front of the bit of terrain. If there is a bit of terrain in the middle, you can move them in front, use Edict Imperator on them, and then move them back through the terrain so they can't be seen anymore.
So you're not having to use Astral Aim necessarily on them.
Yeah, exactly. So there's always an option, but it kind of makes my point in that it's a very like cerebral army to play now, because there's just so much stuff that you've got to consider, and how you're sequencing it. So yeah, you get to that, you shoot the paladins in the psychic phase. You might, because they can't charge after doing that, you might choose to just not do that, in which case you can just go straight into the tide of smite. But this is how to get the value out of the tide, the shooting tide in the psychic phase before you switch to smite, because obviously in the shooting phase you're not going to be in the right tide. So you can do that in the psychic phase to get the +1 strength, +1 damage on the guns. Then immediately after that, you go back to the librarian, use warp shaping to switch the tide into smite, and then you just pile on smites all over the place. And yeah, you kind of go from there. Now, the reason why I've gone through a few iterations of the list. I did originally have Brother Captain Stern because he was cheaper and he had 2 casts and he knew 1 power, so he had gate anyway, but then he could also smite. Although you save quite a few points by taking Stern instead of a normal Brother Captain, he has set Warlord traits, so you can't like take first the fray on him or anything. So what I thought was really important was that the Brother Captain has first of the fray and gate, because he's the one that's extending the smite range. So what you might find is you could actually bring the Strike Marines down into a really defensive position, like up to 24 inches away from the enemy, and still smite them with the Brother Captain to then teleport basically with them to give them the double smite range. But then also you can use the Brotherhood Captain if you want to get the Strike Marines into combat. You can then gate him behind them to get reroll charges if you wanted to try and get in as well.
Yeah, I think that was this sort of psychic mobility is one of the reasons that I struggled really to know what to do screening against Grey Knights, and I wouldn't say I'm the best screening player or defensive player anyway. But you've got so many different considerations, because the sort of stuff that you want tanking the smites is often quite different to the sort of stuff you want tanking the bolter shots.
Yeah.
And when those bolter shots can suddenly become very powerful anti-infantry, anti-tank weapons. What you want to throw up in front of them is a real challenge, especially when it's not just a case of like Thousand Suns where it'll typically be in front of you. It's the fact that they can gate somewhere and do it to a flank of an army, which is just a very, very powerful ability to have.
Yeah. It's also because obviously there's quite a few armies that have some sort of redeploy that you can do turn 1 with, like Dark Matter Crystal and the Necron one as well. But the thing that, because of beforehand, Grey Knights were kind of like, especially
Terrible.
yeah, they were terrible, especially in the competitive scene. I found that because I took Grey Knights to quite a few tournaments, and I found that people had absolutely no idea, and that was half of the positive of playing them, is that people actually didn't know how to play against them.
What's that Grandmaster Dread Knight? Oh, just ignore him.
Yeah.
He doesn't do much.
So, and you kind of, I guess there is an element of that now with the new release of Psychic Awakening. It's going to take people to sort of have an idea of what they can actually do. So there might be some element of it. Why they're doing so well at the moment is because people just don't understand at the moment.
Yeah,
I think that's the sign of a good army, is one where you're making people play differently. They can't
Yeah.
just default to game plan A. They actually have to play it in a totally different way.
Yep.
And I think that's what I found with the Dark Angels as well. That's why it's so strange that both Grey Knights and Dark Angels in the Ritual of the Damned book now play so much more effectively, whereas Thousand Suns, the changes that have been made are just feel so weak by comparison. You don't.
Yeah.
It feels like different people are writing the rules here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think-
want to say, like, now that we've both gone over like the Dark Angels and for the most part all of like the Grey Knight stuff, I was going to say this at the start without having gone over the Dark Angels and the Grey Knights, but there's a huge difference in what Dark Angels and Grey Knights got to what Thousand Suns got.
Yeah, I think this has kind of happened with every Psychic Awakening book to greater and lesser extent. I think, to be fair to Dark Angels and Grey Knights and to other contenders that have had this, like Blood Angels as well, got a huge boost in their book. They were armies that did need that boost, whereas Thousand Suns were at a more competitive level than both of them, it's fair to say. I think the double whammy of Chapter Approved and Psychic Awakening has really helped Grey Knights, Dark Angels, and conversely hurt Thousand Suns.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, actually. Those are two of the armies that have probably seen some of the most significant points drops. Especially stuff that I'm taking. Pretty much every unit in there is cheaper than it was. I can now afford to stick Samael in his land speeder because it's not 220 points or whatever.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd say is that the Marine armies have got their buffs have affected essentially the whole army. Getting doctrines or equivalents with the Tides and the Grey Knights affects pretty much every unit in their book, whereas the Thousand Suns, for example, got an additional psychic power, which can be cast once per battalion. It's unquestionably a buff to them, but it's much weaker than everything in the army getting +1 AP, for example.
Yeah.
Didn't they get some more? They got relics and a warlord trait for
yes.
each one as well, didn't they?
Yes. The Thousand Suns stratagems typically affected the rubrics, which I'm just not sold on as a concept.
No, because in the game I played on Monday, he used a strat to have them pop up sort of 9 inches away from my deployment zone, and I was like, great, but they've got literally no support to make them any good at shooting or fighting or what. They were just out on their own. So yeah, bizarre.
Yeah, the best trick you can do is you can start them 9 inches away. You can double shoot them. They will be stationary in that turn, so you get your full bolter discipline, beta bolter rules, and you can give them +1 to wound. That is a reasonable amount of CP and points for something that's basically aimed at anti-marine firepower that isn't actually that good at it.
No.
So yeah, it's a lot of things for a relatively minor payoff, and you're probably better off just having another guy who can do smite and some chaos possessed or something instead.
Yeah. Just finishing off with the Grey Knight stuff. I mean, every game I've played, apart from a game with Rob that I lost because I was like, I played so badly, but it was because I was like too focused on how the new rules work, and he was playing GSC, so I was like, right, I've got to like gate the paladin, blah blah blah, and he was just like, right, I'm gonna basically drop everything down turn 2 and cover the entire board so that you can't move anywhere. And we were playing Scorched Earth as well, so he dropped down he managed to get rid of my first paladin unit, all but one of them, with 2 units of aberrants fighting twice, shooting all of his neophytes with mining lasers and everything into them as well. He managed to get them down to 1 model, but because he had made his charges, he was on both of my objectives that I put down, and he burnt both of them the next turn because I couldn't get to him. So it was basically game over anyway because I couldn't catch up with him gaining 6 CP in 1 turn from burning them. So it was a very stupid play. But what I've found in the other games is that by doing that strategy that that I spoke about, that I usually do in like the first and second turn, you're usually ending up with, for the most part, like really, really good board control, because you should have taken the center of the board basically, and you can just do what you want from there with the paladin shooting through walls or whatever.
Yeah, I
And
think, and I think ball control is that with the Dark Angels is well, and I know I keep talking about Dark Angels, but let's be honest, I'm primarily talking about Ravenwing, because I still don't think that Deathwing are, you know, they're 2 wound Terminators. They're nothing special, but it's the ball control that's, you know, so important. And I played a game against Blood Angels, and again, a lot of the important stuff wasn't really in a place to be shot. But what he did have to be shot was a whole bunch of units of scouts and intercessors. And turn 1, I picked up 6 units of scouts and a unit of intercessors. And yes, okay, so points wise, it's not a huge amount. Damage output wise, it's not a huge amount. But what it has done is just totally removed his ability to ever really control the board, because, you know, I've just taken his model count way down.
Yep. In that sense, the Grey Knights and the Dark Angels on the high level are quite similar in that
I was thinking they. Sorry, I'll let you finish.
They just kind of like, they both just take the board very quickly, and like you've got the maneuverability of the fact that all of your stuff is maneuverable, and the Grey Knights have got the maneuverability of the fact that now you can shoot and move again, and you can gate and stuff. Like it's very difficult to play against when you've got mobility that's so high that whatever you do, I'm going to have an option against that anyway. Like regardless, it's like in our game, Euan, where, you know, I told you about the 3-inch deep strike, and you were like, okay, well, I need to clump my stuff together to prevent you coming down 3 inches away. But then if I do that, I'm going to get vortexed. So
yeah, what I was like, the lists that you both described have very different units. One's got very paladin heavy. One's quite a theoretically slow infantry force. The other's a much quicker, basically no infantry force. But what they both do well is both pump out a huge number of shots, have ways of boosting those shots, and have an absolute bully unit that can go into the middle of the table and is resilient, and you can chuck transhuman on it to just make it just such a hard unit to kill in the case of Black Knight / Paladins, that it frees up so much of your army to run off and then take the rest of the board control from there. You've also got the issues that you don't want to charge it because A, the units punch back really hard, and B, the Overwatch is so good. And that's not even thinking of All-Spec Scan as well, which I don't think Grey Knights have.
no,
but yeah, that's a very scary threat for armies that want to go near the Dark Angels.
Yeah, all around, very good. Just really good for the Grey Knights. I'm not in. I don't think they're definitely not Iron Hands level, and I don't even think they're Space Marine like pre-Doctrine nerf level. They're definitely good. They've definitely got some teeth. I feel that a lot of it comes from the opponent not really knowing how it plays, in the same way that I imagine when GSC came about, that a lot of people didn't know what they could do, and you could almost like take advantage of that and surprise people.
I think there's
yeah,
certainly a meta shift that might need to take place if they do become powerful.
Yeah.
But then it will be interesting to see what the Doctrine nerfs do. I think for Raven Guard, it's less of an issue because you're almost certainly in tactical turns 2 and 3 anyway. And if all of their characters aren't dead by that point, you're probably in trouble. Anyway, if you've had to go into the Assault Doctrine and you lose that +1 to wound and +1 to hit, but I think it definitely has a bigger impact on Imperial Fists, Iron Hands who want to just stay in Devastator for the whole game.
It's more. It's a huge nerf to Imperial Fists. Iron Hands, not so much because of the same thing that you have. I can't remember whether it's a Warlord trait or stratagem.
They can get it for an extra turn.
Yeah.
I think that's only on a unit though.
It is, yes, but personally, this is just my opinion. I think that when like the Bro Hammer Iron Hands list came out, everyone was focusing a lot on the Leviathan and how it was unkillable and stuff, but actually
it's the unkillable intercessors that are the problem.
Yeah, one of the main aspects of that list was the Psychic Awakening book that came out that gave you the chief apothecary and stuff like that as well. So like, even though the doctrines have been nerfed, like, and the unkillable Leviathan's been nerfed, Iron Hands can still field intercessors with a
5 up, 5 up.
5 up, 5 up, like transhuman, whatnot, and.
But then I don't know whether I'm feeling overconfident, but I look at that list, and especially given the range limitations on things like the Leviathan, I'd be reasonably confident of doing enough damage turn 1 and 2 from distance to then be able to close in for some sort of kill with a list like the one that I'm running at the minute. And you're right, 5 up intercessors is a pain, but again, what I'm finding at the minute is it doesn't matter how tanky something is, enough shots will put it down. And I was, shooting into Terminators with a 2 up save because I only had AP -1 assault cannons and heavy bolters and hurricane bolters, but it didn't matter. They still died. And I'm, if he's doing things like transhuman, it's not like I've gone from damage wounding on 2s to wounding on 4s. It's usually just 3s to 4s, so it's not having as bigger impact, I don't think, against what I've got, which is a lot of high quality single damage weaponry.
Yeah, that is the only thing, is that the other 2 points is that Space Marines haven't had time to readjust to the Devastator Doctrine, and also they haven't had time to readjust to Dark Angels and Grey Knights potentially actually being like a tier 1 list. So we'll just have to see what comes of it, basically. I agree though. I agree. It's definitely I don't know how Iron Hands would have fared against like Raven Guard with that much damage output, or even Grey Knights with smites and stuff like that. Because I guess we'll never see it, because the most tournaments, I think I know even the Northeast Open, they were using the Space Marine FAQ, so there wasn't even a situation where you could see the Bro Hammer list versus new Grey Knights, or
there's a tabletop tactics video that's got some traction, which is that matchup. But the Dark Angels one is an interesting one, because I do think the combat potential of that list as well is something that you don't want to underestimate, with the Black Knights coming in and just punching something off the board very quickly.
Yeah.
You say that, but actually they don't want to be in combat. That's the last place they want to be. In a pinch might be quite useful, and they were quite good at punching their way through a bunch of Zangors, but if they're in combat, that it's probably not I've had to move them out of formation and then suddenly probably expose some other stuff. So they're only really going to charge into chaff and stuff that is going to be easy for them to delete because their damage output is pretty mediocre. It's a AP -1 on a wound roll of a 6. It goes from damage 1 to damage D3. And I suppose actually, if I'm going to have to be in the Assault Doctrine in turn 4, if there are any alive, which hasn't happened yet by turn 4, then maybe suddenly they do become a bit more useful. But I have got loads of stratagems. Well, I've got a stratagem that enables me to fall back and shoot without penalty. So it's like better Ultramarines. So there is that potential there. And actually, if you do spend the CP, which I don't think I need to now, on the specialist detachment from Vigilus, then you have an option to charge into combat, fight, and fall back before the enemy has struck you back, which is quite cool. But again, I don't think the damage output really warrants that kind of expenditure on CP.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I'd like to, because Lawrence is a great player, but I watched that battle report, and I think even in the comments, people were saying people didn't understand why he played it like that. I'd be interested to see how a unit of paladins fared against, like, actually getting into combat, because he played very defensively in that game. He didn't even move a unit up to then charge them or anything like that.
Is it potentially because he didn't? Because I think in an ideal scenario, he'd be able to commit pretty much all of his forces at once. Because I think that's the way to counteract that kind of list, is you've just got to go ham on chucking all of it. And he kind of tried to do that by turn 3, but by that point it was with a bunch of just strike marines who were all trying to make 9-inch charges, and it was too late by that point.
He also forward deployed one of his units of paladins when Vic had the first turn.
Yeah, so I didn't get that at all.
Yeah, I didn't get that. So, and he pretty much lost most of the unit like turn 1 without them even doing anything.
Yeah.
So.
But that seems like a good place to wrap things up. Any final thoughts before we go?
I kind of don't like playing Grey Knights now.
Well, because they're good and you like being a hipster.
Yeah. They were my army that I went to when like I was tired of being like super competitive and I just wanted to like have some fun. And now they're like, now they're like just disgusting, and I've got all these things to think about, and I'm just like, Well, you've still got your Tyranids who are still near the bottom, and you can always get into Death Guard or something like that. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
I
think because I've sold my Red Corsairs now.
Oh, okay.
Which went to Stuart if he's listening, so he's got my Red Corsairs. I've always wanted to do like a pure World Eaters army, so if I'm gonna go Chaos again, I'm definitely gonna do that, and then hopefully that'll be my fun army that I just want to charge stuff in and smash things to bits.
I do like the idea of some Red Butchers.
Yeah.
I've used them once, and they were very good. Yeah, they I was playing Vanessa's Tyranid, and they just wrecked everything they got into contact with.
Because actually, Chaos Terminators, and if you can get the bits for it, well done. But if you just give them a Stormbolter and a Chain Axe, are super cheap. And then if they've got that extra attack, fight twice, extra strength, just mental.
Yeah. My list is the list that I wanted to do was it's just a dual battalion. I think it's two 10-man units of berserkers, and then a couple of 5-man units, and then just some cultists, and then it's a max unit of Terminators, loads of buffing characters with Khan and all of that, and then it's like I think it's 3 assault drills.
What, the the termites.
Yeah, the termite assault drills. So
Oh.
rather than like running them up the board in rhinos, it would be coming out with
Amazing.
the drills and.
I suppose the only problem with that is because you're going to have the Terminators presumably deep striking in as well.
Yeah.
How much of the army is then?
Yeah. I think beforehand I had the list spec'd out to be like two termite drills with 2 10-man units, and then 2 rhinos with 2 10-man units, and then obviously all the buffing characters and stuff like that. And I think I had a couple of Hellforge Contemptors with the death claws and plasma blasters.
Amazing.
So I think
Well, the other
that
thing
should
is
work.
with the drills, they've got a 12-man capacity, so I think so you can get some characters in there as well.
Yeah, and then I think I had a Chaos Lord with a jump pack with twin lightning claws, which I would now give him the demon weapons claws.
So I think they're Slanesh only.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah, the claws are Slanesh.
Okay, but I had him with the Warlord trait where I can't remember what it was. Is it like hits explode or 6s deal mortal wounds or something like that?
There's a 6 to wound studs, mortal wounds, and you can get that to stack, I believe, with veterans and the like.
Yeah, you can get it to stack on a World Eaters to a 4. So yeah, it's basically like a Chaos Lord, like hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, and then rerolling 1s, and 4-ups deal mortal wounds as well, and just lots of combat again. I seem to be drawn to combat.
But yeah, I think we'll call it there then.
Yep.
So bye everyone.
All right, cheers, guys. Bye.
Cheers. See you later.